Roop.
And my name is Kellie, and we're so excited to welcome you to our first ever Dear Simi Valley podcast.
We are so happy to finally be bringing you this podcast that we've been working so long on, and just to provide you with some insight. This podcast will serve to tell the stories of different people with different identities from Simi Valley and explore their stories a little bit. We'll cover topics like racism, sexuality, and gender.
And before we dive into this episode, we do want to provide a trigger warning for sexual assault and or suicide. So with that being said, we want to welcome our beautiful guest, Celia.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be a part of your initiative. Thank you.
Yeah, Celia, so why don't we go into a little bit about who you are, what are your preferred pronouns, your identity, and what you do for a living?
So my name is Celia Sandhya Daniels. I identify as an Asian American. I'm an immigrant, I'm a parent, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a musician, I'm a photographer, filmmaker, a blogger, and I am married to this beautiful woman and I have a lovely daughter. I have so many identities in my life that I want to amplify, and that's who I am. Most of all, I love to be a human rights activist, and I'm working towards it even to today.
Yeah. So I personally, Kellie, I've heard a little bit about her story. I think Kellie has too. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about your story, from really birth, to now, because I know you've gone through a lot in your life, and I think the people should hear it.
Absolutely. So my story is such an amazing collection of the events that happened in India and in this country. The way I want to start is I'm putting on this hat and I'm traveling back to the time I was 4 years old. I remember being born in South India, in Chennai. I was this little boy who wanted to be a girl. I was so much wanting to be a girl that I told my mom that, Mom, I want to be a girl. And my mom looked at the colonial constructs created by the British government and she said, this is not who you are. But she just let me play around with my cousin sister's skirts, and I was enjoying my gender identity at the time, pretending to be a wonderful girl. And while I was 7 years old, my mom told me that, hey, you can't be wearing those skirts, you're a boy. Probably at the time it hit me that I was a boy. Till then I felt like I was a boy and a girl. But there was a time when the feminine side of my life went back into the closet. And it was really hard for me. At the time I realized that my anatomy was not just doing justice to my gender. I had this white noise in my head that always kept telling me that you're a boy, while my preferred gender was being a girl. So I was struggling in both my genders, and that is now, today I know it's gender dysphoria, but at the time I was struggling in both my genders, my birth gender and my preferred gender, which people don't talk about those days. And also when I was in my school, whenever I used to get up in the morning and get ready for school, the first thing that hit me is, okay, what am I going to do today that is going to prove to my friends that I am a boy? And I want to really be a mature boy so that I don't have any attributes of my femininity. So I used to pretend a lot as to, okay, I'm going to be a macho boy today. I played field hockey, I played cricket, I did all kinds of funny things. And I wanted to be funny too. I was into a lot of things that showed that I did not have any of my feminine traits in my day-to-day life. And that's the way I was growing up. But deep inside I was struggling. I was struggling in this dark place where I didn't know what was going on with my life. And being born in a conservative Christian family, it was told in the Bible that a person like me would go to hell because you are not exactly what God made you to be. And when I looked at my own life, I thought about it and thought, what is wrong with me? Instead of asking the question, what is right about what I'm doing? But I knew something was wrong. Mm-hmm. So it was really difficult for me to carry that shame. It was hard for me to carry the shame. And I lived with this white noise every morning, and I looked at girls, and I was attracted to girls. but I was never attracted to boys.
Mm-hmm.
That added another layer of confusion in terms of my sexuality because I was still heterosexual. I was attracted to girls while I wanted to be a girl, which is actually very interesting. And I didn't realize at the time that I had some problem. It was gender identity issue. It was more of, if you are attracted to boys, then you're gay. And those were little segments and small boxes that people had created.
Mm-hmm.
They always want to box you in those small segments, and that's how my life began.
Mm-hmm. So if we could just back up a little bit, because I think that for a lot of our viewers to kind of define what gender dysphoria is and the feeling to it would really be helpful for a lot of people who may have never heard that term before.
Right. So gender dysphoria is basically you're born as a man and you want to be a woman, or I would say that the preferred birth and the birth, the preferred gender and the birth gender. These are the two genders a person usually has. So when I'm born as a man, I have a preferred gender, which I prefer to be Celia as a girl. And sometimes when you switch between genders and you always feel like, I want to be a girl, and then when you switch between genders and when your entire, your thinking and the whole process of aligning to that identity changes, you have a lot of gender dysphoria. For instance, sometimes I can give you an example. I used to give presentations as this is later part of my life, I'll come to that. But sometimes when I was a man, I felt like while driving home, I wanted to wear a skirt in the middle of the road, and I would just pull into an exit and then wear a skirt because that's my preferred gender, though my birth gender was, a man. So I was struggling between both my genders, and when people go through, they're switching between genders constantly and adapting to the different identities in those genders, you have a lot of gender dysphoria that's being created.
Mm-hmm.
And that could sometimes cause a lot of anxiety. It could cause lack of self-confidence goes really low. And sometimes people commit suicide as well,
Mm-hmm.
to the point where they don't know how to handle their gender dysphoria. So, yeah, that was something that I was dealing with. But I'll be talking about it more and more during our conversation today.
Yeah, and so you're in India, you're a little boy and you're experiencing gender dysphoria, and what happened next? How did you cope with that, especially living in India and living in a conservative Christian family?
So it was really hard the way I was brought up because I looked at the Hijra community in India, and they were the only trans people I could relate to, and I was not really identifying with them. I looked at them and I thought, I am you, but I don't relate to you.
Mm-hmm.
Because I want to live my life, I don't want to come out. If I come out, I know my parents are going to kick me out of the house. And the only options I had is either go join the Hijra community or kill myself.
Mm-hmm.
Or you just have to live in the closet, by the way. That's the only option I had. And I thought, I'm not going to come out, I'm probably going to live in the closet. And I didn't understand that actually triggered a lot of internal trauma when you're growing up as a child. And while in my 4th grade, I wanted to mention about this because while I was going through trauma, during my 4th grade, my uncle molested me. I didn't realize why he did that, and I blamed it on myself. I said, it's because I'm different, and he did that to me. And it was hard. I didn't want to tell my mom. I didn't want to tell anyone in the family because it was a lot of shame that you're carrying, especially living in a conservative community in India. I was going through that, and just 2.5 years later, my cousin brother did that to me again.
Wow.
And I was like, this is happening again. What is this? I mean, is this what men do?
Mm-hmm.
Grown men, is that what they do to little boys? Or, is it because I'm different?
Mm-hmm.
The whole experience kind of put the blame on myself. I just said, it's because I'm different and I'll take the blame. And that is how I started my childhood. A lot of shame, lack of self-confidence, not hopeful about my future. I could hardly see a few years into my future because I didn't know that I would survive. Every day was difficult, but I would keep myself more humorous and with music and a few other things that I did. Most of all, I was spending a lot of time in the beach. I sat there in the beach and I used to always cry because that was my only outlet that I had. I cried a lot, and that was my therapy too, because I didn't know anything else. I didn't have parents to talk to, and I didn't have a religion to lean on, but I was thinking, God, if you're out there, why did you make me like this? Please change me. Please correct me. I don't want to live like this. This is really hard. I don't want anyone to live like this. Am I the only person in the world who is made this way, who is created this way? So that was a big struggle for me growing up, in spite of all the traumas that I was carrying with being sexually molested. So that was the most hardest part in my childhood. But I'll come to the part where it became even more intense, and when we have our conversation. But I just thought I'll talk a little bit about the lack of self-confidence, and that caused some self-harm too.
Yeah. And again, so sorry, but I want to go back and talk a little bit about hijras as well, because wow, that segment was, I think, really powerful, and there's a couple things that I want to touch on. But, I myself am Indian, and I've heard a lot about hijras, and, for those of you who don't know, also in Punjab, where I'm from, there's this idea that, when someone gets married, I don't know if you're aware of this happens in Punjab, the hijras come to your house and they dance for you,
Right.
And they perform for you, and you give them money. And so I think to explain to people what hijras are, so for those of you who don't know, the hijras are a community in India, and my understanding is that they're almost like, instead of, being transgender, they're like a third gender. Could you explain a little bit about that for the people who may not be aware of what hijras are?
Yeah, absolutely. Indian culture is Aryan race, right? Probably 4,000-year-old culture. And there's so much of, I would say, so much of mystery, a lot of stories and some Puranas and lots of, I would say it's from the Sanskrit scriptures, and a lot of the stories that came out of the mythology were so much gender fluid. There was a lot of spectrum, and gender was more as a spectrum, where the gods like Shiva and Vishnu and even Krishna, there were times when they had expressed themselves in a feminine way. So the culture came out from this 4,000 years of, I would say, the Hindu concepts where they were worshipping different gods, and they also created these dasis. These dasis were people who lived in temples, or men who dressed like women lived in temples, and they were there to satisfy or pleasure the people in that community. And that is how the Hijra community was known those days. And they were also revered because of their life, and especially when they lived in the king's courts. These Hijra folks would be the ones who used to dance, and they used to bless the young children when they're born. They used to bless the married couple, and that's the way they were revered those days. The whole concept of the Hijra community changed when the British government came to India, and they introduced the binary system. But before that, the Hijra community was always visible, they were revered, and they were always respected for what they did. But unfortunately, the whole thing changed after the colonialism, where they went into hiding, and a lot of them are into sex work, begging, and also being performers. So that's the most sad part of the Hijra community back in India.
And Celia, I see you here today. You're beautiful. You have participated in a lot of activism within your own community, and sometimes for me, I see your former past of just feeling that hopelessness of crying out to a God and a religion that has seemingly rejected you because of your identity, having a family who doesn't quite understand where you're coming from. So I know that there's other trans kids who may also feel this loss, this isolation. So what kept you going in those moments? Did you have anyone to confide in, or was it hope that kept you going for a better life?
That's an amazing question, but at that time, during my struggles, I didn't have hope. I was attempting to, do a lot of self-harm, But I remember in my ninth grade, I had this hope that I really wanted to come out. I wanted to come out because I couldn't just be dressing in the closet. So I found a time in my family when my parents were not around, and I wore a long skirt and a top, and I covered my head with a scarf, like a hijab, and I walked out in the streets for the first time. And the wind blowing on my face and blowing my skirt was the most amazing experience that I ever had. And I thought to myself, this is so easy. Why are people so hateful about just being who I am? While I was walking through the streets, I was going through a construction site, and there's a security guard who caught hold of me. He said, "Hey, what are you doing there? Come here." And I walked closely. I was really reluctant, but I walked really slowly and close to where he was standing, and he saw me in the light, and he said, you're a boy. You're a hijab boy. What are you doing here? Are you trying to sneak around in a dress? What are you trying to do? And he was drunk, and while he was yelling and on top of his voice, a couple of men started surrounding me, and that number kind of grew from 6 to almost like 15 to 20 people, including women. They were standing around and pointing fingers, and the most derogatory language that you can find in the Indian dictionary was thrown on me. And I was just a ninth grade child, probably, I would say 10 years old, not knowing why people are angry at me. So this was very difficult, because in India, sometimes when you get caught, and if you're known as a hijra, they could do anything to you. It's worse, and sometimes they could beat you up, tie you up, and they may not kill you, but they will hurt you. So I was scared, because I knew that they were going to probably take me to my dad and say, look at your son, what he's doing. And I didn't want my parents to go through that shame. So I closed my eyes and I stood there saying that, okay, beat me, whatever you want, do that, but please don't take me to my dad, because my dad cannot take the shame. I can take the shame. That is such a sad state to be in when you're a child. And I was just standing there, and for some reason I started speaking in Hindi. The South India we predominantly speak in Tamil, and I spoke another language, close to Punjabi, it was Hindi. And they were confused. They asked me, what do you mean? And I said, my market jana ho. So I wanted to go to the market. And they were like, I don't know what you're saying. The market is over there. They pointed, me to the market, and I kept running from there. I came home, and that's the first time I was so afraid to live and afraid to die. So I was in this big confusion and complexity in my life where I didn't know what to do. I just learned to suppress my femininity, and I said, I'm going to survive. And that's the way I started, with a lot of hopelessness, and hoping that while I'm growing up, this femininity would go away. Because it's not that this is a lifestyle we choose. This is our life. People don't realize it. And that's what the Christian community, when you grow up, they say, yeah, these people are like that because that's the lifestyle they chose. We don't choose this lifestyle. We are wired that way. That's what is in our DNA, and this is how we are. And there are people who are different. You have 7.5 billion people on the planet, and everybody is different. So why do we have to bracket people, put them in boxes, and say this is what it is? So I didn't have hope. And at the time, the only hope that carried me through was the beach. I would long to go to the beach because that was my therapy. I'll go and sit there. I used to take my skirt in a plastic bag, and I will quickly put it on. I will sit and spread the skirt across the sand and just stare at the horizon, watch the sunset and the moon rise, and that always kept me more closer to nature. Having a hope that, God, if you made me this way, please correct me. Please change me. I was living in denial because I didn't want to be this way. And that was my story in terms of looking for hope. But definitely I will talk a little bit about how the hopelessness can change into hope and also give you a meaning and a purpose. But I want to talk a little bit about that later. I just want to listen to your questions before I get.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to provide more context. I'm so sorry, but for people who might be listening and be like, "Oh, well, why didn't you just run away from those men, or why did you, stop enough?" I just wanted to explain a little bit about Indian culture, and that is in Indian culture, everybody, no matter you know them or not, is auntie or uncle, or which is auntie and uncle, and then or like bhaiya or your sister. So it's like everybody is we act like everyone is related to you, and we're told to respect people as such. So if a random man calls you out on the street, you're gonna say like "Hanji uncle," or like "What do you want, uncle?" or like "What do you need?" And we're taught that it's disrespectful, no matter who it is, to turn away. Like I remember going to India and calling the corner store guy like uncle and auntie, and being born in America, that was really confusing for me at first, but now it's just a thing that we do everywhere. And so I just wanted to give that little bit of context for people who might be like, well, why did you just stop for a random man in the street? And it's like, that's just normal interactions in India. And so yeah, I just think your story in India is so fascinating as well, because I can't imagine, you came to Simi Valley, but I can't imagine what it must be like to live in India, knowing, what happens. I think it's very publicized in India what happens if you are, a hijra boy, or if you're different, or even, in the gay and lesbian community. So I wonder, like, how that weighed on you. Like, just, do you think it's different? I mean, we'll get into this later, but just shortly, do you think it's different from living here to living there? Because I feel like people are probably like, oh my god, it's India, it's a third world country, like that must have been so hard. But I wonder like what your perspective is for the difference.
I think living in India was more they were accepting to the transgender community, but not to the LGBT community, which is interesting because this is my analogy that I've done, but I think the queer folks are the ones who started this whole movement, both in India and here, because what happened in India is there was a lot of people who were queer, and also the transgender community was more known, and there were also people who were men and men, they were having sex, and it was a very common thing within the Hindu mythology, but that was not emphasized at all. It was more common to have a man dressed like a woman, but what about women dressing like a man? It wasn't much spoken about. So there were a lot of things that were hidden, and only certain aspects of the LGBTQ community spectrum was amplified. So it is a little bit different, and people still think that India is very open to transgender community, but as much as the women are getting raped today in India, it is possible for the trans women to not even be on the news. Sometimes they don't even care. Last year or the year before, I remember one of my friend she had posted about her friend who was a Dalit transgender who was murdered. And even within the Indian society, the caste is much more known and prevalent, which is so disturbing, because if you can be in the transgender spectrum, but if you're a Brahmin transgender person, or if you're well-to-do, if you have a lot of money, you're always known as, you can do whatever you want, and people will respect you. But if you're in the lower part of the food chain where you don't even have money and you're Dalit, then you can be unnoticed, and there's a lot that's going on in India. So there is a difference in India versus here. The color, as we deal with person of color, the trans people of color get murdered here. So when I was talking to my Indian friends, I said, if I'm walking in the streets today and if someone doesn't like me, they can easily kill me, because that is what is growing today, the hatred that's growing in today. Last year, 27 trans women of color were murdered. I mean, trans people were murdered, and 90% of them were trans women of color. I have been approached. I was in a situation where I could have got hurt in Long Beach, right here in California. So I've been through some really difficult situations in my life where I find that hatred is all over the world, towards the trans community. It's not just that India is very tolerant or US is tolerant. Just because it's a third world or a country that's so developed, the hatred towards LGBTQ community is much prevalent in all the countries across the world.
Yeah. So you're talking about, being in school in India. I wonder, how that experience, did people at school at all find out about you, or, were you open with anybody, or was it just, all to yourself and just like continuing on with your story from there?
The biggest challenge I had is I didn't want to come out because I was struggling not to express my femininity. And I knew if I come out, I'd get bullied, I would get beaten. In India, people beat you up, that's the way it is, and they beat you up really bad. I was scared to get beaten, and I was a very thin person at the time. I was so scared, and I used to always think, what if they beat me up, and what if they do something else to me? And most of all, if they ostracize me as, we're not your friend, I would really, for me, I'm a people person. For me, it was really hard to be in that boat, and I didn't want to do that. But I also carried a lot of shame. So the shame was so much overpowering that sometimes shame could cause you to even get to the point where it will say that you are not worthy to live. You need to die. And I have attempted that twice in my life, and it was not great. But I was so scared because there was a point where I really was choking myself, and I could sense that I was almost blanking out, and I thought, oh my God, I'm really going to die. Is this happening to me? It was hard. The reason I didn't go into that is because I quickly pulled out my hand. Actually, I tied my hands behind my back to kill myself. I didn't want to live at the time because of this hopelessness and the society and the shame and the fact that you couldn't talk to your parents about the problem that you're going through, and the fact that you couldn't talk to your friends about the problem you're going through. That could really put a lot of pressure and weight on your life, that it could probably say you're much better off dying. And to that point where I knew that there was something in me that kept saying that there is always a light in the end of the tunnel. I don't know what it is. Maybe there's something. The hope that I had was maybe it'll go away. Maybe I'll change. Maybe I'll become a boy, not a girl. And that's how it was.
So that's interesting, because were you ever able to see your future as a woman? Or was it always just, maybe this will go away and I'll be able to live happily as a man?
It was the latter part of it, because I always thought this will go away. I didn't know that this was a problem, and I thought I was the only person in the world who is going through a gender identity issue. And what do you know? There was no internet at the time. Like I'm talking about, I was born in the early 70s, I would say. There was no internet at the time, and there was no way you could find a research. And if the doctor diagnoses saying that you're different, they would put you in a psychiatric ward and start pumping you with testosterone, which they do even today, unfortunately. And I was so scared. I didn't want to be in those wards because I knew that I was thinking to myself, I can get over this. I don't want to be a girl. I think I can get over this one. I'll be okay. So the hope that I had was I'll be okay. And I was still in denial till I got married. And the interesting thing is I was attracted to my wife. When we first met, it was an arranged marriage. And we both were attracted to each other. And I'm still attracted to my wife after 23 years. But the interesting thing was I felt deeply inside, I don't know, some kind of a psychology or whatever, it kept telling me that if you get married to a cisgender woman, everything will go away because she's taking away your femininity, which was a weird psychology. And I said, okay, I'm going to get married, maybe this will go away. And I got married, and I came to this country in 97. I was working in New York. I was going back and forth from New Jersey, and I was very happy with my life. And I was using all my professional career as a distraction to my struggle that I was going through inside personally. So I came to this country, and I was thinking that maybe this is a new environment and everything is going to go away. I'm going to change. I'll become this really, really successful businessman. Fortunately, I was a successful business person, not a businessman. But just 1 year in our marriage, it came back. And at that time, we were living in North Carolina, and I didn't know. I was thinking to myself, and I was literally sitting in the balcony and crying, saying that, oh my God, I'm married now, I have a wife, and I don't want this. Why is it coming back? Not many know about these things. And I didn't know what I was struggling with. And here I was not wanting to be a girl. I'm doing this interview because I want people to know that I was trying my 200% or whatever percentage not to. And lo and behold, we had a beautiful child 3 years after our marriage. And things were quite different, and I thought maybe I'll focus my life on my daughter because we saw this beautiful child growing up and we wanted to focus our energy on her. And we did. But at the same time, I remember just driving back from the office, like I explained earlier in the conversation, I was wearing my formal clothes and then I used to slip on a skirt and drive back home. Sometimes I used to go to the motel, take up the motel and just drive, slip on a skirt and just sit in the bed quietly, and I could feel my heartbeat just pounding because it was anxiety mixed with the fact that you're actually expressing yourself in a preferred gender.
Mm-hmm.
It was gender dysphoria, which I didn't know it was at the time, even at the time when I was struggling through that. So yeah, I came out to my wife and I told her, sweetheart, I'm going through a problem. I want you to know what it is. I didn't know what to tell her because I said, I sometimes wear women's clothes. That's my opening statement. And she was like,
She's like, that's a weird fetish.
Yeah, exactly, that's what she said. She said, no, that's fetish, I know there are some men who do that, but you need to get over it. Then I said, no, since I was a child, I've been going through this one.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that I acquired in this country. She said, no, you can talk to a therapist and, just make sure that...
That idea of like America did this
Right,
to you, right?
America did this to you. And I said, no, sweetheart, I've been like this since I was 4 years old. And she said, no, you can change it. When you grow, these things go away.
Mm-hmm.
So I spoke to a therapist on the phone at the time, and he was a Christian therapist, a gay counselor. And I was, the reason I spoke to a gay counselor is because I thought he might understand trans people. He might be able to relate to what I'm going through. Because a cisgender person might not understand what I'm trying to go through. Because whenever you tell them about a problem, especially with the gender dysphoria, they think it's like an addiction.
Mm-hmm.
They'll say, yeah, you need to have a 3-step program or a 7-step program or a 10-step program. Yeah, you can get over this one. And I didn't want to go through all that, the struggle, so I just spoke to this counselor and he told me that I was gay. And I told him, sir, I'm not gay because I'm not attracted to men. And he said, no, you're a feminine gay. I was like, what on earth is a feminine gay? He said, no, I know people like you are gay, and there are some folks who are feminine too. I don't know what he was referring to, but I thought to myself, why are these people telling me something that I am really not?
Mm-hmm.
And fast forward a couple of years, I was in Arizona where we were living in Scottsdale. I remember I met a therapist who was also a surgeon. She used to do, and she was a trans doctor. I met her in a party and she looked at me, my friends introducing, this is Celia, and she's a crossdresser. That's the terminology they used at the time. And I was introduced and she looked at me and said, so you're an Indian? I said, yeah, I'm an Indian. You look like a woman, maybe you'll be happy. Are you happy with your life? I said, yeah, I'm happy with my life. She said, I can turn you into a real woman, because I can do surgery, I can do approvals, and I'm a government authorized surgeon, and I think you will be really good candidate for that. Then I was, as much as it was a compliment, I felt so horrible. I said to myself that I am a scientist. I worked on human genome projects and I worked on crystallography and I know a lot about science. Who are these people telling me how to live my life?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Why are they just boxing me in a certain category? And I said to myself that, no, I want to find out what's going on. I want to discover what's going on. But I am not going to do surgery. So I just want to pause here because there's a lot I want to talk about.
Yeah.
I know you had some questions too,
Yeah.
while getting to this point.
Well, there's a couple of things here I think that are so interesting, and it's first that I want to say too that I think like in the Indian perspective, it's so interesting because you're checking all of these boxes as a man, right? You're educated, you're successful, you're a big businessman, you have a wife, you have kids, you had an arranged marriage, and it's like seemingly your life is perfect and it's going perfectly, and it's actually going doing exactly probably how your parents would like it to go.
Mhm.
You know, moving to America, working for huge companies, tech companies, you're a comp sci major, you know, we talked on the phone about, you know, you throwing big parties. And so really you were the perfect Indian man is what I don't think that some people might pick up on.
Mhm.
And so I think although a lot of us might not be able to relate to gender dysphoria, for me it's almost like happiness as well is a good way to describe it, because you know you should by all accords be happy, especially, you know, in Indian culture that's what we're told, especially if you're a man, that all you need to do is be educated, get a job, have a family, you know, and just live your life, and that will make you happy. But in your mind, in your brain, in your heart, something is still missing, right? And I think that might be something that, you know, even if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my God, what is she talking about? She's confused. She's clearly not confused because she's at a therapist and someone is telling her, you are gay, right? And she's like, no, I'm not. I know that much. You know, I love my wife. I'm attracted to my wife. And so I think even if you're watching this completely confused right now, you know, you're like, absolutely not. I think something that we can all get behind is like, we've all felt that, you know, we've all felt at one time that something is missing, right? Whether you're at school and you're in the wrong major, you know, I don't want to oversimplify it because obviously your feelings are a lot more complex, but I'm just trying to get people maybe to understand in some way, right? It's like, I feel like there's such this thing of like people, you know, trans people are confused, they just don't know what they're doing, they don't know what they're saying, and it's not true, and you know, in every respect, you should have been like, I have everything I need in my life.
I think on top of that, what's interesting to me is the conversation of a trans person not fully transitioning unless they have a medical operation. And I know there's a lot of stigma outside of the trans community, especially I remember when the trans debates came up, everyone was saying, well, if they come into the bathroom and they don't have the same genitalia as me, I'm not going to be comfortable. But at the same time, you have to take into consideration, first of all, there are trans people who simply do not want the surgery, maybe can't afford the surgery, and that makes them just as much trans as people who do medically, you know, change their genitalia. So how did you feel being in that trans community? Did you feel any stigma by choosing that medical operation or not? And how did that go for you?
I also think now might be a good time to pause to check camera battery.
It's good. It paused for a second, so we lost a few seconds when you were telling a story, but it's on its second round now.
Okay, so we're good?
Yeah.
Awesome.
My phone is still good.
Okay, awesome, cool. All right, so let's pick up there with how you fit into the trans community. I think you can also go into social versus medical transition if you want to.
That's what you're
And action.
No, that's a great question, because I really believe that when you are coming out, the only two, I would say the two boxes we had was you're a crossdresser or you're a transsexual. And when I came out, it was like, I don't fit in either of these boxes because I'm not a crossdresser. It's not about dressing because I'm dressing, because there's something in me that's making me do that. And so it's an inner, I would say an inner expression of my, or an outward expression of something that I'm going inside, is why I'm expressing myself differently. I don't identify as a transsexual because I don't want to have surgery. Now, where do I fit in? I was always exploring these questions because I was always living in denial. You know, I didn't want to accept myself. I believed truly that I would change, and you know, over the years I might become different. But unfortunately, it was going the other way. I was successful as a businessman. I was very successful. I was a partner in a Fortune 500 company. I had lots of people reporting to me, and I was a boss. I was managing, you know, 45 million worth of business.
Boxes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So all those boxes, and I had a great home, and you know, I bought a house here in Thousand Oaks, and I was, you know, commuting between Simi and Thousand. I was doing a lot of things here. At the same time, I had a beautiful wife, and I had a lovely family. I had everything I wanted, but I did not have peace. I was struggling deep inside, and I knew that, you know, professionally I was successful. Personally, I was dying. I was kind of decaying to a point where I didn't know what was going on. And I knew that there was just a matter of time my personal life would get into my professional life and I would probably not do well in my profession. So I was so scared. And I didn't want to come out too because I was an executive in a company. I moved on to different companies. Companies wanted to hire me and I joined another research firm. Then I went and joined another a top five, big five, one of the big fives. I was working with them. During all my transition, or I would say my work transition, I always felt like there's something, part of me missing. And I in fact came out in my last company. I said, hey, I'm gender fluid. I remember sitting in a meeting and coming out that I'm a gender fluid person to the LGBTQ community within that company. They didn't understand because it was run by LGBT folks, and it's more like a gay and lesbian community. So they did not understand what I was trying to tell them.
Mm-hmm.
And to get to your point about, I explained to them that I'm a non-op trans. They were like, what is a non-op trans? So I explained in the transgender spectrum, you have 3 types of trans folks, predominantly. This is based on the medical journals that I've read. You have post-op transgender, you have a pre-op transgender, and a non-op transgender.
Mm-hmm.
So the post-op transgender folks who have done both the top and bottom surgery, and they are living their life. They have transitioned medically, they have transitioned legally, they have transitioned socially, personally, family-wise, especially in the community-wise, they've transitioned, and that's a big step. And I really applaud people who do that because everyone's journey is different, as I mentioned. So, and then you have the pre-op trans who are working towards it, taking hormones and working towards getting surgery.
And the op is just operation.
Operation,
Yes.
yeah, the op is operation, I'm sorry, I admit it. And then looking at the non-op trans or non-operative transgender person is a person like me. In a non-op transgender could be different because you are not medically transitioned because you don't want to.
Yeah.
It's just that you don't want to transition. I didn't want to transition, and I knew that I had other complications medically. I have diabetes, I have cholesterol, I have an irregular heartbeat, and I have
those Indian problems.
just I don't know.
that ghee.
Eating a lot of ghee, eating a lot of puri, chapati, whatever, everything just piled up, and I think this is a common thing in the South Asian community, where especially in India and other continents in that side, it's more predominant that your cardiovascular diseases are very high.
Yeah.
So that's what I was dealing with, and I also love my wife and my daughter. One part of me is like, I want to be with my wife and daughter because I really love them. My family is important to me, my job is important to me, and though I'm personally struggling, how can I come out in both these spaces? It was really difficult. And I remember when my daughter was 15 years old, she found out that her dad was wearing a sari and had taken a picture. And she found this picture and she came and asked, Dad, I saw a picture of you wearing a sari. And my wife told me, hey, please don't tell her. She's just 15 years old. What will... And we will talk about Loka kahenge. But, and especially when my wife was thinking about it, she said, no, you cannot say such things to your daughter. And I told my wife, sweetheart, if I don't say, she might get this information from someone else. If the parents don't tell the children about what they're going through, they are probably going to get from the wrong sources. And they could, and the whole impression about their parents there'll be a lot of disconnect there, and I need to tell her. So I took a couple of days, and then I called her one day, and she's such a sweet little tiny, I call her my kitty cat, and I said, come and sit on my lap, Daddy's going to tell you something. She was like, what, Dad? And I told her my story, and that was the most emotional moment for me. Within 25 minutes, he was like, Dad, I'm so cool. I'm so cool about it. And I was like, oh my God, how could she just get it? She said, Dad, are you going to become a woman now? And I said, sweetheart, I express as a woman, but I'm planning not to be a woman. But I mean, I'm not planning to completely transition, but I express myself in because I need to. And she said, yeah, I get that. But I knew, and I said, if you see Daddy as a woman, would you be okay with it? She said, no, I don't care. And to me, that I don't care was a little more personal. It was because that she was missing her dad. She wanted a dad, not a mom, because she had a beautiful mom already. And I told her, sweetheart, if you want your dad, I will be your dad. And I will always be a dad, and I will always be a husband to your mom. no matter what the world thinks about family relationships, sometimes it's important for me to have this family together. And this is the greatest gift I can think about. I never had hope when I was a child that I wouldn't get married. Now I am married and I have a beautiful child who knows me. And I was like, wow, this is where the hope comes out. And I want to be the dad for you. And I remember my wife, it took a long time for her because she was more having the society stigma.
Mm-hmm.
Living in the Indian community and South Asian community was really, they love gossips, and especially if they knew that this family, look at the man, he's become a woman now, it'll become a topic.
And the fact that you're so successful that there's nothing else they can say,
Yeah.
I know, but people are so, they love to amplify the negative part of your life than the successful part of your life. So I was more scared for my wife, and I was almost out in the community at the time, and I was doing a lot of social work and I was getting involved. But I was struggling, and my wife also was really having a hard time saying that, please don't come out, what will people think, and it's really hard for us. And I didn't sign up for this, a lot of times she said that. And I said, sweetheart, I will be your husband, but understand that I need to also be who I am sometimes. And there are people like me who are struggling.
Mm-hmm.
I now know that this is my life. I've always been in denial for 40 years, almost 42 years. I didn't want this. And finally, when I started accepting my gender dysphoria, slowly went away. I still have, but it's not as intense as I used to have. And it was more because of the social acceptance that I had. And socially, I was transitioning at the time. Medically, I was not transitioning. Socially, I was getting to a point where I had put my story on the newspaper in Acorn, Simi Valley. I remember the first time I spoke was in UCC Simi in 2013. I told my story to the entire church, and everyone. There were little kids sitting there, and they were all asking me a question, and one little child just got up and said, "But you are a beautiful woman. Why would they say that to you?" There was a little child who was, and I started crying there because I knew the heart of the children are so pure and so kind that I was thinking, why Simi Valley? Why are you so hateful? Can I come out in Simi Valley? And I told my story again in 2015. It came out in Simi Acorn, covered by Alicia and her crew. They covered my story. And I remember I was so glad that it was a big article. I still have that, and I just came out just the way I told my story today to you today. Every aspect of it, and I just was very plain and open about it. I'm still struggling, I'm still learning, but it's not about me, but people like me. There are a lot of folks who come out as gender non-binary. And this was even before Caitlyn Jenner came out. And I was debating to myself as to, I don't identify as a post-op trans because I have not done my surgery, but what would the community think about me? I was having all these doubts in my own mind, but I still said, I'm just going to tell my story.
Is that the trans community or the Indian community or both that you're talking about?
Both, yeah, absolutely. So more in the trans community, I would say LGBTQ community. But even within the trans community, whenever I went in for these programs and events that I participated, they would always ask me, so when are you going to have your surgery? And I'll say, I'm not planning to have a surgery. Oh, you're a cross-dresser then. I'd say, no, I'm not a cross-dresser. Then you should have your surgery. I said, no, I'm not planning to have my surgery. It was always a chicken and an egg. I was like, no, I'm not planning to have my surgery. And I was thinking to myself, and I asked them, why do you think I should have my surgery? They said, you look like a woman, and hello, isn't that a great way to, and you are, you're an Asian, and this is your life, and this is what you do. I said, no, I don't want to do it. I was very confident that I didn't want to get into the part of where people define me. And in Simi Valley, I remember there were a letter to the editor that came out in Simi was so powerful.
Very
and so
famous
strong.
letter to the editors.
I know.
In the Simi Acorn.
The one person wrote to me. This was from a church, and the person was a pastor. he wrote a lot of offensive things about me. And I was thinking to myself, when a person is coming out and being so vulnerable, why are you so hateful? Why are you so hateful? Can't you be sympathetic or empathetic to the person? But instead they're just throwing you under the bus.
So, Celia, you mentioned this idea before that I think might have made people sit up in their seats if they know what it means, and it's that ideology or phrase, I guess, rather, of log kya kahenge. And I think any Indian that's listening, or Pakistani, or anybody that understands that mentality, or even Bengalis, or any Desi person really who understands that, kind of just got a whole host of PTSD as soon as that came out of your mouth, because it's such like a prevalent theme in all of Desi culture is like log kya kahenge, which means what are the people gonna think, or what are people gonna think, and it's not just your family, it's everybody, right? It's your family's friends, brothers, sisters, family, right? Like that they're worried about. And it's like I experience this, I know every single Desi experiences this no matter what you do, whether for me it's like getting a tattoo, having a boyfriend, having a girlfriend, but for you, it's a whole other thing. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about that mentality, especially with your wife, and maybe the transformation too up until before when she said that to you, and then now, and how you deal with that mentality, because even if your wife doesn't carry it today, people still do. It's like, oh my God, Celia is out and proud and log kya kahenge, and like it's not just about his wife, it's about how other people perceive you. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I came out to my daughter and she accepted me in 25 minutes. I came out to my wife since 2004. It's been a struggle because of the fact that it's not a normal thing in a family, especially in an Indian family where you're successful and you're really doing well. Why would you come out? My friends have asked me in my career as well as to, I have a group of trans friends who are professionals, and they said, Celia, you're doing well, don't come out, just be in the closet, have fun as a girl. Sometimes, we have the girls' night out, but don't come out. But to me, it was important because the more I was educating myself about who I am, the more I wanted to tell the world that, hey, this is actually a problem, which people think it's a problem, but this is the way people are born, and it's not an issue anymore. And we can, once you learn about people like us, you can change the world. You can have families, I make the families accepting, parents accepting. And so I started going to these groups, and we redefined P flag in Simi Valley as fluid. I worked with the people in that community and in that church, and we changed the name. I went to P flag and started helping and supporting parents and children who are coming out at the time. So it was important for me to also have the faith aspect of it, as to, I always thought that if you're a Christian, you would just die if you go to church. And I
just like get burned.
Yeah, like
burst in flames.
Burst in flames. And I remember entering a church for the first time, and I was in the church, and I was standing there, and the hymns were sung, and tears were rolling down my eyes because I was thinking to myself that nothing happened. And is it for this? Since I was 4 years old, I've been crying that I'm going to hell because of this fact that I cannot be in a church. And I found that people were redefining law and love in the way they were defining Bible. They focused more on law and legalism, which made them take away some of the really good aspects and the teachings of Jesus, and focusing more on hate. And if you're wrong, if you don't fit into the mold that we have created and God has actually made, then you are sinful. And that's how people were perceived. But when you talk about man and woman, these are the two binaries, but there are people in between too. Even in the ancient culture, we always had people in every culture. In Indian culture, they probably have 3 genders. In Native American, they have 5 genders. And I am a person with 2 genders. And everybody is born with some femininity and some masculinity in them. And we amplify some of our masculinity, sometimes we don't amplify. But there are also folks who are born that way, they are intersex. Right? It's as equivalent as having women with red hair There are so many intersex people today in this world. I would say probably 1.4 or 1.7 million. Maybe my numbers are wrong, but it's that many intersex people exist today. And when you take away their gender choice, and there is a documentary by Katie Couric in National Geography about this one, and she basically focused on the intersex folks and the ones who are born differently with both the testes and gonads and all. She talks a lot about a person of intersex and how these are folks created by God. When you're born in this world, we are born for a reason. All of us are born for a reason. And it's not that we should be born perfectly, but we have to be born as real people. So that is what matters most. We could be different, our fingerprints are different, our colors are different, we are born in different countries. But the most important fact that we lose is, hey, I want this person to be like me, and only then I can identify with you. And that is such a wrong thing to do, right, in today's world.
I think it's interesting you bring up religion, because I was raised in the Catholic Church, and I remember sitting in the pew with my family when the Supreme Court ruling came out about gay marriage. And we just had a whole lecture about loving your neighbor, loving one another. And at the very end, they were doing, passing around the baskets, and they brought up the ruling, and everyone started booing. And so it was very conflicting having this message of love, right? But then immediately after, shunning this community out. And I know that your trauma goes even further, right? You're crying on this beach, like crying out to God. You have this religion that doesn't really accept you when you're younger. How did you deal growing up? Because now you're involved in the church. You said you've given speeches at the church. How did you deal with that trauma that you had, that rejection from the church, and how did you kind of revolutionize or kind of retransform your connection with that spirituality, and also how you use that, because that's an intersecting identity you have. You're a Christian woman, so how do you use that to sort of talk to others? Exactly.
But also, I want to add to that, because I'm not a religious person, and I don't really know much about any religion other than, Sikhism, which is what I was born into. So my perception of both Catholicism and Christianity is very minimal, but, my perception on how they feel about the LGBTQ plus community is obviously not good, but they don't feel very good about it. So like Kellie said, like, how do you reconcile that, and how do you find faith in God, despite everything that you've been through?
The first fact that I wanted to refer to Psalms, in Psalms it says that I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And you have chosen me in the womb, the mother's womb. And when I was thinking about my fetus, as I was just picturing if I was a fetus, and if God had a plan that I'm going to be a trans woman, and this is how my life is going to be, then I just need to accept it. Because if I'm wearing a head of male and female, and I'm not going to, because I was in denial too, right? I was always hoping that I would change. But when it stopped is after I started saying that, okay, God, you made me this way, fine, I get it. You made me this way, and let me just, then if you made me this way, then give me ideas, I don't know how to live in this world, I'm struggling. And things started falling in place because I started reading too. A lot of came from reading and understanding, and also putting it in the right context. Because if you read Bible the way you want it to be, it will be the way you want it to be. You want to use Bible for hate, if you want to use Quran for hate, if you want to use Bhagavad Gita for hate, you could do that.
You can find what you want, basically.
You can find what you want. But that's not what they are writing. You learn from history, you learn from Bible, you learn from these documents of people whose lives were flawed. Yeah. People like Abraham, people like Moses, their lives are all flawed. They are not perfect people. But what they showed is there is always a God who loves human beings the way they're made. And that element of the aspect of love of God was taken out of context. And that's why when I grew up as a child, if you touch this one, it's a sin. If you eat pork, it's a sin. If you watch a movie, it's a sin. If you drink alcohol, 1 glass of wine, it's a sin. In fact, Jesus was drinking alcohol too. It was wine, right?
Yeah.
but they don't, in India, that's not the way it is. Oh, you are drinking a glass of wine, it's a sin. So we were so caught up in laws rather than the love of God. And so I started taking religion out of my head and I started building that relationship to that creator who made me. And I used to say that to me, Christianity or any of this religion is more of my relationship with the person who created me, God. And if God made man, it's not just God made man, but God made man and woman out of his own image. That means God has a persona of man and woman in him, in her, right? So that is so important for us to understand that God is thou. And we sometimes use the word they, thou in the King James Version, which sometimes is very equivalent to what the gender non-binary people are referring to. It's they, them, thou. That actually came from the Shakespearean way of writing. Yeah. So it's not that different. It's not that hard. I mean, I sometimes struggle with it. But I came to a point where religion was more of a rules, following rules to a relationship. And once I found that God made me this way, God loves human beings. God loves people who are different.
And God made you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
God, I mean, as a religious person I'm talking, I know there are a lot of folks who may not believe in God, but it's just my perspective and my fact that I found that a lot of people in the LGBTQ community who are part of a church, they've been plucked out of the church just because they came out. Because the sexual orientation was different and they were not attracted to another sex. They were attracted to the same sex, and that's the way they are wired. People are wired, and that is not a lifestyle choice. There is no lifestyle to this. This is our lives. You know, they fail to understand. Bible is full of eunuchs. They write about eunuchs, people who are intersex. And even in Acts, it writes about how God cared for that Ethiopian eunuch. He sent Philip to talk to the Ethiopian eunuch and address and say that, hey, not to change the Ethiopian eunuch, but to be more powerful in the role that the Ethiopian eunuch was doing. I can go in detail about every aspect of Bible because I have read the Bible, not because the way I wanted to, but the way it was written.
Objectively, yeah.
And once you understand the author and the way they've written, even Bhagavad Gita, even Quran, the way that you understand certain aspects, there are lots of great aspects. Even from the Sikhism, Guru Nanak, the way he wrote. The way he established the whole Sikhism was more about love. It wasn't about rules.
Acceptance, yes.
Yeah.
Acceptance, right?
Yes.
I mean, we can go in detail on this whole topic again, but to me, as I was stepping into the church, the first thing that hit me was, okay, am I a sinner or am I a saint? No, I'm not. I'm not perfect. But God accepted me, and I found a point where I knew that I'm not going to hell because I'm who I am, and I came out. And though I got all these hateful letters that came from people, and a lot of that people were writing about it, and I sat in my car crying, and I keep talking a lot about crying because my life was that. And I'm so happy now because I don't cry anymore. I cry for the right reason, not for the wrong reason. But I remember I had two choices. One is either I keep brooding about my life and just, listen to what people are telling who I am, or make a change. And I believe that I said, you know what, I don't care what people tell me. I don't care what people think about me, what the Christian community thinks about me, what the transgender community thinks about me, what the LGBTQ community thinks about me, or even my office, what my friends are thinking about me. So I slowly started socially transitioning. I started coming out in my workplace, and I started my own company now. And I have worked in the industry for more than 23 years. I'm a strategic consultant. I'm a management consultant, and I do a lot of strategy planning. And I came out, I had a session in Amgen as well. We had a panel session. We talked about empowering trans women at workplace, and especially I was focusing on gender non-binary because 27% of the youth in California identify as gender non-binary. And especially when you're looking at 2025, you're going to have a lot more people coming out. And your workplace is going to be full of millennials. 75% of them are going to be millennials.
And Gen Z.
Exactly. And how are you going to handle that? The companies are not ready yet. They are so happy, just welcoming trans people as a diverse group. But they are not looking at inclusion part of it or integrating part of it. And that's where I started focusing my energy, all my corporate experience back into empowering trans community. And that's what I do with Trans Can Work. So I work with this organization, and I'm on the executive board. I'm an executive board secretary for trans can work, and I empower these trans women and also the trans women, trans men, and gender non-binary folks into the workplace. Helping the employers, educating employers to be more, changing their policies, having unconscious bias and conscious bias, addressing all these issues, and also addressing issues, especially how to educate trans folks to also be part of the cisgender world, and just kind of seamlessly integrate them. So I started getting involved in this, and I found the meaning when I sat back again. I went to the Pacific Ocean during COVID time, and I sat in my car, and I was not crying anymore, because the same little boy who was crying, when I was in the 9th grade or when I grew up, I didn't have a hope, and I now know that my hope, actually, my hopelessness turned into hope. And there is always a hope. If I have to look at my younger self, I would say that, hey, have hope. You're going to have a wonderful family. You're going to have a great life. Just don't kill yourself. And that's what I would say. And I'm glad that I did not do anything drastic to end my life. And I want to save trans folks. Because 41% of the LGBTQ community, they attempt suicide. So it's really important that this is such a vulnerable population, not a population that has to be discriminated by the government, based on sex and gender. Which the act that came up and which Obama had put in place, where he included gender also as a part of this ACA Act, which is 1557, and now Trump is trying to overthrow that because they want to take the trans community out of that. Same thing happened in the military. It's happening in the school board. It's happening in the housing, happening at schools, even in the prisons, and especially with healthcare. If I'm trans, when I see my doctor, and if I come out to my doctor that I'm trans, the doctor can tell me that, hey, based on my faith, I don't think I can do anything for you because it's against my faith. And I remember coming out to my doctor in UCLA, and he was very patient because he didn't know what I was going through. It is surprising for me that why the medical community is not able to understand what trans people are going through. I called my cousin who is a doctor, and I asked her, do you know the terminology as gender dysphoria? And she said, no, I have never heard that word before. I cannot rings a bell, but I don't know. And she's working with trans patients. Now here's where I thought, okay, all right, let's pause and take a stock of what they don't know and how do I educate these organizations. So I'm actually speaking to the Nurses Association of California this Thursday, and probably these are directors of the nursing program in California. They wanted me to address about some of the issues that they're going through, that the trans people are going through. How can we change? How can we empower the trans community? And I found a lot of meaning in not just fighting for trans, but while I was fighting for trans community, I was holding a placard that said, disarm hate. It was after the borderline shooting here. I've held the same signs for when the immigration issues were happening and the kids were thrown in the jail, and it was so horrible to see those kids getting abused. I stood there holding sign, and I stood there holding sign for a very improper Supreme Court judge, Brett Kavanaugh. I stood there holding sign for immigration policy changes and reformation. I stood holding sign for Black Lives Matters. I seamlessly, when you fight for human beings, when you care for someone, you don't care for just one group, you care for everybody, and that's why I kind of turned into a human rights activist now, because to me, human beings matter. And I know Black Lives Matter is so important for us, we are focusing on that, is very important. But Black trans people of color, that also mattered a lot to me. That's when I started fighting with my Black trans friends as to how do we help and elevate that group that is being disregarded. So there are a lot of things that we need to change in this world, in this community. There's so much of work to be done in our county. Close to 30,000 LGBTQ folks live in Ventura County. And I remember talking to Mayor Rob McCoy last year in the City Hall when he declined to give us the proclamation for June Pride Month. And I told him, sir, I'm a Christian. I have a family and I live here. And I want you to know that I am not perfect, but I'm real. So there were times when I came out, even in the city hall, and I don't need to fight for any. It was not about trans. It was about being who you are.
Yeah.
And to me, that mattered. And I see a lot of change in Simi Valley, where the Simi Valley mayor actually gave us a proclamation for Pride Month to the UCC Fluid Group, which was fascinating. I've got another Pride proclamation from Moore Park as well last year. So many things happened, and I joined the League of Women Voters actually. And what I felt was this, I thought it's good for me as a trans person to educate my allies. So I found a lot of meaning just to help and educate the Democratic Club, the League of Women Voters. I spoke to them. I spoke to a lot of Big Brother, Big Sister group, and anywhere I could use my my trans voice. I use the platform, like what we're doing today. I started talking about why it's so important for trans people to vote, and I also had a chance to work with the county clerk last year, especially educating that community. And we had sent some documents so that they will educate the poll workers, and they will know exactly how to handle the gender non-binary folks.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I go as Celia, I should be able to vote. My license might be different. So change can happen. Like what I did in Costco.
Which is, let's explain that a little bit. It's
Right.
So you are Celia Daniels, right? But as a gender non-binary person, especially, does your ID say something different?
Yes, my ID is still Daniels,
Mm-hmm.
and you can
And it
have
says
one
male.
as male.
correct?
No, it says gender non-binary. So I have an
Okay.
X in.
Ooh.
Okay, so I didn't know that was a thing. So let's
Yeah,
explain
that's
that. 'Cause
awesome.
I didn't know. I'm
Yeah.
assuming maybe that's California. Is that in
There are
every
some
state?
states that is open to having a third gender. You could choose male, female, or X.
And this is
mine
something I'm assuming you have to change as well. So for people who don't
Yeah.
change it, but they're still expressing as their chosen gender, or not chosen gender, that's not a right word, but just expressing as who they are, they might go to the polls. This is something I found out recently, that they might go to the polls and their ID says male, but if you're expressing as a female, they might not let you vote, which is to me blatant voter suppression. But talk a little bit more about that, because I think that's something that people don't know and don't understand, that that's a thing, because we know about voter ID laws in terms of that in inner cities and voter suppression, but not in terms of the trans community and gender non-binary community.
So we've been doing that education through League of Women Voters. Last year we did that, and this year again we have sent some documents to the county clerk and said that, hey, there are people who identify as gender non-binary, who their IDs might not match, but it doesn't mean that they are not having the privilege to vote. They are citizens, and they need to have every right that they want to express, and their vote counts. So we've been educating that. That's been happening. And especially if you go to the poll workers know when you tell them that, hey, my name is Daniels, but I'm here as Celia, my picture might not match, but I'm a gender non-binary person, and they will be able to vote.
Mm-hmm.
So that is possible today.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, it was always a question in the past, but now it's possible. And I also checked that out during the last election that happened, and I did go as Celia, and there was no issues at all. They just took your name and they just went with it.
Yeah.
So that was, I think I'm glad California is much more open than the other states, but that education has been happening to the poll workers, and it's a lot of training that has been given to the poll workers, and also how do you address that part of it?
Yeah, and there's a lot of fear mongering going on. So I'm going to address the audience straight up here. Is that if you hear some stuff that's like, oh, that means anybody can go to the polls and just say, I identify, or anyone can go into the bathrooms and say, I identify as, it doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. Full stop. Doesn't happen. And that's all I'll say on that.
Absolutely. I think, the most important thing is any threat that has happened, this is all created by people who hate. It's because of transphobia. And I have used the bathroom many times, and I will use the bathroom in Europe. I've used bathroom in India as well.
Mm-hmm.
They were just giggling, but they were very nice to me, and they knew that I was a trans woman because I was not the average height of an Asian Indian woman. But they respected me for what I did, and when other countries are so open to it, why do we have a problem in US?
Mm-hmm.
In fact, if I was able to use a ladies' bathroom in India, in a city, and suddenly in North Carolina we have a problem, why would that happen? I mean, we don't have an agenda. Our agenda for anyone is to go and do your job and you get out. Maybe I'll touch up on my makeup, and that's all we do.
And there's this theoretical threat of safety, right? And
Yeah.
it's like this theoretical threat of, oh, there's a man coming into, and it's like, no, realistically, there's a very real threat of your safety if you were to go into a male bathroom, Miss Celia.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah, that was a real, it was always scary sometimes when people don't identify and they say that, hey, you're actually a man, you need to go to the men's bathroom, then, I would rather leave the restaurant. And this has actually happened to my friends in LA, where they were asked to use the bathroom of their birth, not the preferred gender. So it does happen in some of these weird people who are, they are not very accepting. So we need to constantly keep educating them. So I had also given a recommendation for the California policy through California Endowment. I worked with Trans Latino Coalition to somewhat change some of these areas. How do we change it? How do we make sure that the bathroom bill is not passed? And these are important things that there's no violence in the bathroom. In fact, the violence has happened because of the fact that there's always some threat of someone else doing it. It's not the trans people are going there and they have an agenda. And that's why we need to have more gender neutral bathrooms also, which we every office
It's
is
happening. I think they have
Right.
more per college.
correct.
Mm-hmm.
So it's happening. It's happening in a few companies around Thousand Oaks and Simi Valley. They're all changing. But the important thing is, when you're taking the most vulnerable population and then putting a lot more blame and that, hey, you are going to be a threat for me in my own bathroom, is not right. I mean, I've been in bathrooms where women just looked at me and stared at me like this, and I'll be like, hi, how was your day? And I'll be putting on my makeup and they were like, oh, good. And they had doubts, but they didn't think that I was a threat to them. And if I was a threat, I would just say, I'm a trans person, I'm here to use the bathroom, and I'll be leaving right now after I put on my makeup. Is that okay with you? They'd be like, okay, whatever. And I'm fine with that. Because if that is the least resistance I get, I'll take that. Rather than throwing me out of the bathroom. But I have not faced any bathroom discrimination. But it's not that it doesn't exist. It is very prevalent, and it's really hard for the trans men. They've been struggling a lot, and I know a lot of my friends in Thousand Oaks and Simi Valley and in Ventura are going through, especially the gender non-binary population. It's so hard, and you don't identify in either of the bathrooms, and you're so careful. So a lot of abuse happens by other people who are oppressing the trans and gender non-binary community.
I don't think that we did talk about either the difference between trans and gender non-binary for people who
Right.
might not know, because it is a nuanced, I think, idea. I mean, it's not new because obviously it's been a thing, but I think now, especially in today's day and age where the spectrum, the LGBTQ plus spectrum is, growing, is that a lot of people now are hearing about gender non-binary, and I know other words are like gender non-conforming, and I think someone, when people think about that, I think the most popular example that people might think about is Ruby Rose, because she kind of, I think, broke that barrier, but I don't even know that she identifies as gender non-binary. But when people think about the two binaries, they're like, well, she, expresses, they might think that, because she has short hair and she, is more androgynous, that she's gender non-binary. So I just want to go into that example of, I know that you kind of say both, right? I'm a non-OP trans, and I'm also gender non-binary. So what is the difference, if there is one, for people who might not understand?
So it's a very simple way. I'll just go to the basics where you can say a cisgender person is a person who identifies in the gender that they're born. A transgender person is a person who doesn't identify in the gender they're born. So I was born as a man, as a boy, and I don't identify completely as a boy. And I identify as a girl, and I also identify as a boy, and that's why I'm more gender fluid. So transgender spectrum is more like a spectrum or an umbrella term for a person who doesn't identify in the gender they're born. And that's why it's called transgender. It's trans it's like transcontinental, it's like transgenders, all between all the gender spectrum, like gender, and they want to define their own gender, and that's what they call gender non-binary. Gender non-conforming is more as a terminology that is used as an expression of gender non-binary. That's why it's like I'm not conforming to. That's why it's called gender non-conforming. But the actual term that's it's known as gender non-binary is the way in which they don't identify in either genders. That's why they call it gender non-binary. And I hope the important thing is to understand that it's a spectrum and it's a journey. The whole thing is like an umbrella. You know, if you're talking about Hijra community, if you're talking about a lot of people who don't identify in the gender they are born and they are called transgender. Even if it is 50% or 10% or 20%, they are still called transgender. And that is what is important, and it's so important that people say, no, I'm just a cross-dresser. There's nothing like I'm just a baby.
It's not black and white.
Yeah, there's nothing like that. So it's always a spectrum, and it's always queer, right? You're exploring, you're questioning. And that is how our world should be. We are born to question, we are born to always explore, we are born to resonate our expressions in different ways, and then harmonize in different ways. I think, to me, gender is an amazing spectrum, and I found so much of joy, being as a gender fluid person, because I identify in my male gender sometimes, very rarely, but there's a percentage of that I keep it for my family, because I really want to respect my family space, and there are times when and it's because I don't hate my male gender. I don't hate the gender that I was born with, and there are people like that today, and some of them don't like the gender that they're born in, and that's why they have surgery, and it's their journey. There's no defined terminologies in anything. There is no defined boundaries. Some of them just have a top surgery. Some of them just don't want to have surgery. Some of them just have a facial feminization surgery. So people have always asked me this question as to why don't you have a surgery? Why don't you do this? Why did you do this? It's like I choose painting. I love music. I love art. I love anything. I want to be who I am, and what is going on in my bedroom, in my family, it's none of anyone's business. Because they would.
Like, why are you thinking about that anyway, right? Like, why are you thinking about what I have going on anyway?
Exactly. And to address the point, I have a cisgender wife and a cisgender daughter, and to me, I would say I'm a heterosexual man. As a male, they would think that I'm a heterosexual man, but I'm a trans woman. So I'm more as a trans lesbian, you can say. So it's a weird way in which we try to put people in these brackets.
These labels don't work for a lot of people. I think is what we're learning, and it's like for you, I think like me and Kelly think that you're such a dynamic guest to have on because you're so sure of yourself. 100%. And again, like I want to address the audience in that if you're listening and you don't understand, it's not your job to understand, but it's your job to respect people for who they are. And if they're sure of themselves, it's not your place to question them no matter what. And that's what I see in you, Celia. And I think, we would benefit from talking a little bit about your family structure. Not too much because, again, I don't think it's anybody's business. But, just a little bit about how that works. And I know you say now that your wife and your daughter are your biggest allies. But, that had to come to a turning point. And also that you're comfortable with your wife calling you her husband and your daughter calling you her father. So I'm wondering how that works and, the intricacies of your daily life. Because I'm sure for you guys at this point, it's normal.
So when I was coming out, I always listened to what people were saying, and they were giving different ideas, and they said, if you are trans, this is what you need to do, step 1, step 2, step 3. And I don't like following orders. I mean, it's so funny, but to me, I'm a more scientist kind of person. I always love to discover the fragment of the DNA as to why I'm different, not just listen to somebody in a TED talk. For me, I'll go to the science. I read research papers. I read articles about MRI of a trans person. The brain of a trans person is closer to a trans woman is closer to the MRI's brain structure of a cisgender woman. And I read so many articles about why people are different, why they are Y different. It's not 23 pair. It's not just XX and XY chromosomes. There are 23 pairs of chromosomes that define you. So there could be a lot of ways in which a human being can be different. Now, in my family structure, when I didn't come out to my wife in the right way because I didn't know what the right things to tell her. So I said, I like dressing like a woman. And she said, oh, don't dress up like a woman. That was so easy for her. And then I thought to myself,
She's like, got it.
Amma, yeah, don't do that, don't do that. And I was thinking to myself, oh, what do I do? How do I tell her? And then I came to this point where after I went to these conferences, I started reading a lot. And I'm in the healthcare business too. I do a lot of, I work with, medical codes. I was in the, I was more in the policy side and also in the payer side of the industry. And now I'm working with the drug industry. So I understand the way people think about it. The healthcare business in the US has become very, very commercialized. And it's gone to the point where they started focusing on the population that is most necessary. So the transgender community was always rejected and they were always under the cover because they were not identified. They wanted to erase the transgender community even from CDC. So in that case, I was reading so much that I told my wife, sweetheart, I have a problem. And I came to her in a very different way. I said, sweetheart, I now know that I have a problem. Mm-hmm. And I have tried my entire life and to not be who I am, but I cannot help it. And I learned about it, and A, this is why I'm different. B, this is why I'm different. C, this is why I'm different. And I explained to her, and she sat looking at me and said, how can I help you? Mm-hmm. Now the conversation completely changed because I was talking to her about the problems and the side effects of what I'm going through rather than saying that I wanted to be a girl. Mm-hmm. And I remember coming out to my mom, I want to be a girl. I came out to my wife again saying that, sweetheart, I like to wear women's clothes. None of this resonated well because I didn't have the information. Now I have the information and I want to equip the parents to understand this information. It's data. When you look at data and when you start looking at and you start analyzing as to why people are different, it is so easy to accept the community and why people are different. Mm-hmm. And I think that changed her. And I explained to her that, sweetheart, I know there are few people like me in this world. In US, it's 1.7 million trans women are there, and I want to help their parents. Mm-hmm. You get it now after 17 years. It wasn't easy, right? And my wife was now she's my biggest ally.
This is your wife after 17 years.
17 years she accepted me, and we've been married for 23 years. I'm very open about our family life, and I tell my wife all the time that, hey, sweetheart, I spoke about you today. She's like, hope you said the right thing. Then, because I want people to know that we are real. We are real. You can see me in Walmart, or I'll be walking
and
around.
You're not alone. You're not the only one.
Yeah, and there are a lot of people like me walking in Simi Valley who are not able to come out. And because that's been such an ostracized community. Mm-hmm. And I want them to know that there is nothing different about us. We are not here to threaten your lifestyle. We are not here to threaten your sexual orientation or your gender identity. Sorry, your sexual sexual identity or sorry, I'm confusing. We are not here to threaten your sexual orientation or your gender identity. We are here to be real. Mm. And we want to tell these narratives to your family, to your parents, so that you will not get kicked out from your home. Mm. I remember a lot of trans kids were actually thrown out of the house and they don't have any place to go. They have probably taken refuge in their friends' homes, and just because they were coming out, the parents did not like them. They didn't want them. I remember going back to India after many years, and I sat on a beach and I was talking to the waiter in a restaurant, and he looked at me and said, ma'am, you look different. And it was a 4-star restaurant and very upscale. And I told him I'm a hijra. And he looked at me and said, no, you're not a hijra. I said, why do you tell that? He said, because you're educated and you look like you are, you're an NRI. You look like you're from US. You don't live in India. And you look rich. And that's what he said. You look rich and you're not a hijra. And I said, I am a hijra. It's just because the ones who actually came out, they're not thrown out of the house and they have become hijras because they don't have any other refuge. Mm. If I had come out when I was a child, maybe I would have been like them. And now I'm out and I'm helping people like me. Mm-hmm. And I told this story to my wife. I always tell the story that you always look at people differently. If an alien walked into this conference room today, or into this recording today, or in your living room today, and asked the question, and what is the first thing that alien would say? the alien would say, how would the alien address you? The alien wouldn't say, hey John, or hey John, shall I call you as a he and she? No, the alien would say, hey human beings,
Yeah.
I come from planet blah blah blah, and I'm here as, I saw your human beings dwell in this planet Earth. And it's so important when you look at it from outer space and you look at the whole science and the world. It's so fascinating that we have created all these tiny boxes.
Binaries for everything.
Yeah.
And we have put all the human beings into these tiny boxes.
Yeah.
Where the world is so big, our galaxy is so big, it's huge. And we need to expand our minds in such a way that accept people, accept aliens, accept anybody. Always be open to the fact that there may be other life forms who probably are not even he or she.
Yeah.
Right? There's so much in science, there's so much fascinating in this world to be worried about, where we want to care for our planet Earth. And that is what is so important for us, not just to be so narrow-minded in our living room, we want to be this way and that way. And,
Yeah.
and so I think it's so fascinating for me as a person who's worked in, chromosomes and DNA, still working in those areas, to go back to these companies and educate them. Schools, educate colleges, educate every opportunity you have, every place where you can educate people. And most importantly, make a change in the policies, in the government,
Yeah.
because we need that right now. And if the government, if this country is for the people,
Yeah.
it's not that for the people, only white people, or it's not, it's only Latinos, or it's not that way. It is for the people. And it includes trans, it includes gender non-binary, it includes every race and every ethnicity.
But
And
I
that
think
is-
too is we need to start making those changes in ourselves, because I think just as a norm in America, I won't speak for other countries because I was born and raised here, but especially in America, we gender everything, literally everything. Like I'm like talking about my car, and I'm like, oh, she's doing great. Like, who's she? Like my car, like. My car doesn't have a gender, but it's just, and I was talking to one of the girls on Rise, Cassidy, the other day about how we use terms like sir and guy and dude as like gender neutral terms now. And it's like, I literally call her, I'm like, my favorite thing to say sarcastically is like, okay, sir, but it's not like because you're a man, it's just like, I think it's funny. But I think too, like, you're talking about chromosomes, so I do want to go back a little bit to the intersex discussion and the hydra discussion, because we talk about this gender binary that we've created, by the way, and I'll tell you why it doesn't exist, is because there are intersex people who are born outside of this binary, and we actually force them to find a place in the binary, which is where they don't belong. They were born that way. So if you truly believe that this is, the people who make the biological argument, right? If you're making the biological argument, you have to look at intersex people who are biologically born differently, and a lot of them are forced into having a sex change at birth, or at really young in their childhood, when they don't completely understand what or why they're doing it. And I've seen a lot of documentaries. You brought one up where people are now, older intersex people are coming into their identities. Maybe they haven't had the surgery, maybe they have, and they're saying, we don't want to. We don't want to have the surgery. Stop imposing your gender binaries upon us, because we were born this way, and we are fine expressing, however we were born. If it makes you uncomfortable that my chromosomes say one thing, but I was born another way, then you should change yourself, not force me to have a forced sex change, which I think is so interesting that we've created this binary, and there's this whole argument based upon biology, but it's like biology disagrees with you. Scientifically, biology disagrees with you. There is no gender binary. And so I wonder, how, I feel like that relates to you're not intersex, but you've also decided, in your own being, that you are comfortable, being born how you were born, but also expressing how you would like to express, and that's the whole idea of that social transition. So I think it's really important for our viewers, have these conversations with your family, look into intersex people. It's like, what do you say to that argument that's so prevalent of biology, and it's that it doesn't exist. There is no binary for anything. We have binaries for so many things, and there's no binary. And hydras are seen as the third gender as well. And so, you said earlier at the time that you didn't identify with hijras. Would you say now if you were living in India? Because I know with hijras too, it's not just about their gender identity. It's also, a stereotype of, hijras are poor, hijras do sex work, hijras, do this. But it's like, with the actual identity, would you say now that you identify, or you would identify with them had you been living in India now?
So I explained earlier that if you're not identifying with the gender that you're born, you're called transgender. So the Hijra community, the whole of them are transgender. But the word Hijra and the whole concept that comes from is basically 4,000 years old culture. So there is a religious aspect to the Hijra community, which some of them don't identify in India today. So there are close to, I would say, 500,000 Hijra folks who are being identified in the census. And they came out.
Oh, so is that listed on the census?
Yeah,
okay.
in 2011 census. Not in the current one, but in 2011 there was a census. And then if you look at that population, especially looking at India's population, 500,000 is very, very, very small number as a Hijra community. But then what I did was I spoke to a lot of people in India. I did some research when I was working on the diversity and inclusion concept as to how could you change the community and the corporate world. I found there are almost 8 to 9 million invisible, or I would say non-traditional transgender people like me. Because I don't identify in the Hijra community. Hijra, I identify as a transgender person where the Hijra community is one part of it. So that's the way the transgender community should be defined in India. Because the policies are made for the transgender, the Hijra community, not the actual transgender community in India. Because there are a lot of people in India. If I classify the Indian transgender community, I would say there are the traditional and the non-traditional transgender community. So I fall under the non-traditional because there are trans men. Because the Hijra community mostly focuses only male to female. It doesn't focus on female to male, doesn't focus on gender non-binary, doesn't focus on gender non-neutral, gender queer, none of that, right? They only focus on this part of it. So this is one of the research that I did, and I was working on it. And I found that this population is more educated, they are well, but they have not come out much, the non-traditional folks. But the traditional people have come out and they're struggling, and the policies within the Indian government should address both of them. So we're trying to redefine. I'm actually working with some lawyers in India, trying to see how we can redefine some of these policies, because it is only focusing to the 500,000 trans, I would say, Hijra community. So there's such a lot of disparity and a lot of work that needs to be done even within India, where I think, that's why, and everyone was like fascinated. They were asking, Celia, if you come out today, where would you identify? I said, I'm not. Hijra is basically a terminology created, right? Actually, it's just a cover terminology just put on top of you. Like, hey, you are just.
We need to label you, so this
this is what you are. But actually speaking, they are also. Everyone is part of the transgender community. So that's what I focus on today, and that really helped me to see that their needs are so different. Because I've known a lot of people in India like me, according to the Indian culture, they're called Khotis. Khotis are people, they're not called Hijras, they're called Khotis. There are Jopas. So there are a lot of people, even within the transgender community, it's not just Hijras, you have Jopas, you have Khotis, you have other folks. And they have a Nani system where they report to, they have like a caretaker. So it's a very different concept that's been adopted in India. And I'm hoping to change those, the policies especially, so that we could address all of them.
Talking about changing policies, I do want to rewind a little bit when we're talking about trans rights, because I saw we were so excited to have a win of putting gender non-binary on driver's license, which is such a small thing but means so much to the trans community, right? And then we quickly went into discrimination in bathrooms for trans folks. So I think that we still have, or the trans community still has a long way to go in terms of equality. And I know that you're really active within the community, you have your own organization. So I just want to know, how has the atmosphere been here in this local area, and what further steps do you want to take for the trans community for you to be happy within your activism and work?
Especially here locally, because our show, is called Dear Simi Valley, right? So we are addressing an open letter to Simi Valley. So, how has that changed your perspective, or what you hope to do in the future? Because I know you work for a lot of organizations as well.
That's a great point, which brings us back to the point of allyship. And I love the fact that when I came out in 2015, things didn't go well. I explained about that, and I found a lot of comfort in working with people who don't identify within the LGBTQ community, but I was trying to educate the allies around the LGBTQ community, which really helped me to focus on some of their issues, understanding their issues, and holding each other's hand. I think if the trans community wants to, when we identify as a part of a minority within Ventura County, it's important to hold each other's hands. When our friends, it could be any issue. It could be gun violence, it could be Black Lives Matters, it could be immigration policies, it could be homelessness. We just need to hold each other's hands and fight for their rights as well. I think that's the only way we can make a change in Simi Valley. It's important to have the right kind of people in your city council. It's important to have a good school board presidents where they will understand these policies and they will know that the children will not get bullied in schools when they're going there. So there is a lot of change that needs to happen. And I love to define the word allyship this way. And I call allies this way. I say accept, listen, learn, and have the yearning to help them. So that's the way I define ally, because it's so important not just to help somebody, but also to first accept. Then you need to really, really listen to what they're saying, what their narratives are, what issues they've gone through, and then learn from it, so that you will know that this is a real problem. It's a 400 years of discrimination. The Black community has been going through. It's a systemic discrimination in our community, in our school board, in our housing units. Then when you learn that, you're able to then help them with a lot of yearning from your heart. Because helping from your head doesn't really help. So when you help somebody from the heart, it really, really transforms the community. That's why I say that even in the corporate world, I say that the change doesn't come from the letterhead of a company. Change comes from the hearts of the people in the company. So you can put whatever you want out there and the CEO can talk about it, but in the end of the day, it's important for the employees to feel that change. And all your employees are living in Ventura County. They are all a part of a community. And it's so important to have that aspect and amplify that aspect. When you're talking about corporate change, when you're talking about a community change, when you're talking about change in the government, in the councils, and especially city halls, we need the right people there. So that's why the change needs to happen from the heart of the people. And I hope I have answered your question. And there is a lot of things that we can do. And I'm part of, I'm the vice president of Stonewall in Ventura County. And I feel like it's so important right now not to just be a part of the LGBTQ community, be a part of the larger community that surrounds and helps the LGBTQ community. And we help our friends from Black Lives Matters, we help our friends from the Latino community or from the Asian community or the Indian community, whatever, brown community, we're all going through lots of problems and change the ecosystem around it. I think that is going to be so vital and so crucial for us in this election.
Wow, Celia. I mean, thank you so much for coming on, and being our first ever guest on the Dear Simi Valley podcast. And I really, I know this is a long conversation, but I really hope that people will listen all the way through, because I think there's a lot of stuff that we touched on, and this might be one of those things that takes a couple listens to catch everything, but everything that we talked about is so important. And I call you the intersectionality queen, because you truly are. You have so many identities, and we discussed that you're not just a trans activist, you are just a human rights activist in general. And so, again, thank you so much for coming on our show and telling us your story and being so open. Where can people find you?
So I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, Celia Sandhya Daniels, that's my ID. And you can always search for Celia Sandhya Daniels. If you just Google, you'll find me. I'm so out there, and I love to talk about my stories, and I've done a lot of podcasts, and especially for the community. And I was so glad that We're working with HRC as well,
Mhm.
just to make these changes. And Celia Sandhya Daniels at gmail.com. I think I'll also put it in the webcast.
Yeah,
so
and
that
we'll
we
put
can find
everything
it.
in the description
Yes.
as well of this YouTube video. And if you're listening, it's Celia, so that's Celia Daniels. And again, I just want to thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much. And then as for Roop and I, we're representing Rise, which is just at Rise Simi Valley, RISE Simi Valley.
On all platforms, and we just want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And we hope that you guys have learned something today and taken something from this podcast. And this is Dear Simi Valley, an open letter. Bye, guys.